friends, Ukrainian armed forces have attacked the largest power substation near Moscow, the Shaturskaya GRES. There were emergency blackouts in the region. Sheremetyevo airport was forced to close. Drones were flying toward Moscow. The air defense systems were operating. Whoa, 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 whoa. The Combine, damn it. Ooh. Holy shit. The morning begins not with coffee, but with a walk through the mud. Today, everyone really woke up at 7 a.m. as if by an alarm clock. Calm us down. Fuck that, Lucy. Fuck. Bitch. Pussy. At the same time, other regions came under attack. Donbas is occupied. There is a blackout. Attacks on Texas. Crimea is occupied. We're working. We're working. We're working. We help. Stop. Sylvia. Stop. Sylvia. 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 Exit. Ryazan. This is one of the largest night attacks on Russia's critical infrastructure in the past month. This is what the racists are reporting. They are furious. That's precisely how the situation truly is, in its entirety as we understand it. That's how it is, already in a different place. Let's discuss the attacks on the occupied territories and on Russia with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetanov. Roman Igorovich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Igorovich, let's start with the power plant near Moscow. The Shaturskaya power plant was seriously attacked. Damn, another one is flying. It's flying, it's flying. There. It's shooting. Well, I saw that footage. It was really striking. What exactly is that, really? I wonder, actually. What could be the consequences for the region in general? What do you think?
Well, for sure, Ilyich must have turned over in his grave a couple of times by now. That's the very Shatura he built himself. Remember all those photos of him hauling that inflated rubber log so he wouldn't fall? That's exactly Shatura, and now they've reached it. It's just over 100 kilometers from Moscow. It's truly one of the most significant and primary stations that effectively powers Moscow's extensive energy ring. We once comprehensively told you, our valued readers, in a previous detailed discussion, precisely how it's entirely possible to completely cut off Moscow's crucial power supply, even without currently possessing advanced ballistic missiles at this very moment. To hit the energy ring at distances from 100 to 300 kilometers, knock out all the thermal power plants, naturally the substations, power lines, and the 8 technological corridors that enter this ring from almost every direction. So Shatura is one of those main solid stations, I would say. It used to run on peat back in the day, even during Lenin's time. But now, of course, there's a gas supply, so not just gas lighting, but fully gas-powered gas generators, as they are called. There are similar, though slightly smaller, gas generators inside the ring itself, within Moscow, several dozen of them. That's why it's important to cut not only, of course, the power lines to the IGRS stations, but also to cut these gas pipelines that bring energy carriers into Moscow. We've started working. If we continue to maintain this current pace and momentum, the residents of Moscow, or Muscovites themselves, will receive truly a remarkable and memorable New Year's gift. Under the tree, a serious one. What I mean is, they won't see the Christmas tree together with Putin.
And actually, when I look at our strikes now, almost all of them are targeting the CHP plants. So we're hitting the CHP plants in a ring around Moscow. And for example, over the past 5 days, these strikes have been regular. I just looked now, and practically all the CHP substations in the direction of Moscow are being targeted for attack. What do you think?
Combined heat and power plants, along with their essential substations, that is to say, these crucial substations that effectively step up the electrical voltage within the extensive power grid system. it is important for us to shut down practically all the state district power plants, all the thermal power plants around Moscow along these 8 corridors. Plus, of course, the substations that step up the voltage to 500 kilovolts are also important. All those at 500 and 500, 750. If you cut all of those off in a circle, Muscovites will be celebrating New Year by candlelight. Well, they like candlelight. Somewhere there was cabbage soup, bast shoes, something like that. They'll definitely have to use skis in Moscow because trams and trolleybuses won't be running, so they'll have to ski. So in principle, they'll get healthier. They'll get healthier. We do care about the health of Muscovites after all. How could we not? So that their bellies would jiggle as they walk. This is the kind of mechanism we've been talking about for several months now, at least, if not years. This is how you should approach Moscow. If only last year they had managed to use drones, it would have been possible to put pressure directly on Moscow itself. Now, of course, they've covered the air defenses. You can't get close to Moscow with drones, but around the perimeter, somewhere from Shatura, 100 kilometers out and beyond, it's possible. So the path has already been beaten. We're waiting for further strikes. Right now, we're only talking about the eastern entrance. That's from the east. But there are also northern, northeastern corridors, as well as southern, southwestern, and southeastern ones. So these issues definitely need to be addressed further. I think we'll get there. We'll talk more about this with you.
Roman Egorovich, people are writing here about a series of explosions in Crimea. Now, so as not to be unfounded, I'll quote, "Last night, a number of strikes were carried out on chemical industry infrastructure facilities located in occupied Crimea. So they attacked Brom, also known as the Perekop bromine plant. Drones attacked the Glebovskoye underground gas storage facility located in the settlement of Vnukovo. The building of the compressor workshop was destroyed. The Simferopol oil depot was also attacked. And all this happened in a single night." Well,
Russians have had a problem for the past few years. The libido of their men has dropped. So women started pressuring Putin, like, do something about it. He decided to address the issue, figured he needed to do something with bromine, and launched this bromine plant. But of course, as I keep saying, we care about health, including men's health of this part of Russian humanity. Naturally, we took out that bromine plant so that bromine wouldn't end up in Russian men's food. Well, how else can you explain it if we're even going after bromine? But seriously, of course, the chemical plant is in Krasny Perekopsk. It's not just a chemical plant. There's also a substation on the plant's grounds, which the Russians are trying to power from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So all these power lines, the transmission lines that are now being stretched from Crimea toward the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant are actually 2 entry points, one of which goes through Krasny Perekop, through this chemical plant. But the strikes weren't just on it. In fact, about a dozen targets were hit overall. In Crimea, our drone forces, special operations forces, naval forces, and air forces are all operating, which is why our intelligence services are also deployed there. That is the main intelligence directorate, the security service. They are combing through Crimea thoroughly inside and out. Over the past couple of weeks, to put it simply, they basically destroyed more than a dozen radar and anti-aircraft missile systems there. That's at the very least. Plus, we've talked many times about the oil depots, and there have been strikes on airfields. The operation in Saki in Novofedorivka was quite successful. They've also hit power substations, as well as thermal power plants that supply electricity to military facilities. It's important for us to stop the logistics through Crimea, which are currently supplying the Kherson and Zaporizhia directions.
Roman Nikolaevich, for example, there were also powerful explosions in Crimea on the night before Sunday. Local channels reported that an oil refinery was attacked. So it turns out that on the night before Monday and the night before Sunday, we struck oil refineries, and part of the Russian fuel infrastructure, which supplies the Russian Black Sea Fleet and logistics on the southern front, has been attacked for the second day in a row. That's right.
Exactly. We also hit the Ilsky oil refinery, which is already in the Rostov region. Well, naturally through Crimea. In other words, Crimea was also combed through, and strikes were carried out on several remaining oil depots. There are still some tanks left there. They've already started hunting for the tanks. So the main oil depots in both Vardeyskoye and Ferosia have already been hit. And now they're practically targeting every single tank, each of which can hold several thousand tons. They're starting to go after them one by one. In the end, it will come to the point where every container with fuel in Crimea will be targeted. This is about logistics, and it's very important for us to cut off this logistics route. Kurilsky, Afipsky oil refineries, those are already in Krasnodar Krai and Rostov Oblast. Plus, they also targeted the Ryazan and Saratov refineries, so they haven't forgotten about them. Our drones have gone there as well. By the way, this mission to destroy the Russian economy is ongoing, specifically through targeting the Russian oil industry. 2/3, no matter what he says, now Putin is starting to squirm. He's squirming in a place that really shouldn't be his, but Kabaeva's. He's squirming to try to cover up this blow to the Russian economy and to block it in the information space. Because everyone understands perfectly well, and war is all about math, that if we burn down, or rather when we burn down the Russian oil industry, the economy will collapse. Russia will simply fall apart. And Putin is trying to mitigate precisely these direct sanctions against the Russian economy by targeting the destruction of Russia's oil and gas sector.
Roman Grigorievich, you sent a very important message here. As I understand it, some concerned citizens took action. They got into a shootout with the FSB in the Altai region. They tried to disrupt the diligent work on the railway, but the FSB agents there are furious and, as I understand, are working seriously. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
It's actually predominantly Russian state-affiliated channels that are actively disseminating this particular subject matter right now, meaning they realize that a substantial number of opposition forces have now actively participated in assisting with our ongoing strikes on the Russian economy, thereby impacting its stability. And the Russians are trying to spin this topic as well, meaning they're trying to take some information they've dug up from somewhere and present it from their own perspective. But in reality, this just shows that the work of our concerned citizens continues, that efforts are ongoing all across Russia. I mean, we can't possibly cover 17.5 million square kilometers with just our own resources and means. But there are internal resources. And as we can see, those internal resources are working. And the Russians are trying to show so-called resistance. There's no way they can control 100 million people. No matter how many FSB agents there are, they can't lock down 100 million people. There are grassroots partisans who still live in Russia who, in the end, are trying to break free from Moscow's influence. The entire problem lies quite precisely in Moscow, in the oppressive Moscow, and so to speak, heavy yoke, over those various peoples of Russia who are actively trying to escape from this immense pressure.
Roman Grigorievich, while we're recording this stream, Sobyanin is reporting that drones are flying toward Moscow, in broad daylight, so to speak. Temporary restrictions are being introduced at Domodedovo Airport, which means drones are being shot down, and Sobyanin is giving live updates on how Moscow is being attacked in broad daylight. Well, that's interesting news. It's still unclear what has been hit, but the attack is underway.
The thing is, as I've said many times, there are two ways for drones to reach Moscow. There are two mechanisms. The first mechanism is ballistics, meaning ballistic missiles. Russian air defense systems intercept them with an efficiency of about 0.3. So basically, they'll shoot down a third, but 2/3 will get through and can take out almost any target. So roughly speaking, you don't send just one missile at a target, but 2 or 3. And that means the target will be destroyed with 100% certainty. But that's ballistics. For now, we don't have ballistics. We have fairy tales, we have videos, we've had announcements for the 3rd year now, or maybe the 2nd. I can't even remember anymore. But ballistic announcements and ballistic videos somehow don't impress Russians. But a ballistic missile should be impressive. Someday it will appear eventually, because it's not really that big of a problem, all things considered. And the second option is a large number of drones. Now, if say 500 or 1,000 drones were coming because they're drones and they're being shot down on their way to Moscow, if they're heading specifically into that Moscow air defense ring, they get shot down at a rate of about 0.9. Roughly speaking, out of 100 drones, maybe 10 would get through, or even more for them. But really, for at least 100 to get through, you'd need at least 1,000 drones. And 100 drones for Moscow isn't much of a problem, to be honest. That is, they can basically shoot them down inside Moscow itself. So there are two approaches. If you send 1,000 drones to Moscow, you could just as well split that 1,000 up and burn down 10 oil refineries. There's simply no real point in using drones specifically against Moscow. But in the Moscow region, yes, that's possible, right outside the Moscow air defense ring, which is about 50 to 70 kilometers out. So starting from about 50 to 70 kilometers from Moscow, basically at a range of 100 kilometers, you can bypass Moscow and take out targets like we discussed. For example, the decommissioned power plant near Moscow at a distance of 117 kilometers. That's exactly the sweet spot. Moreover, within this 100-kilometer radius, give or take 20 or 30 kilometers, the Russians have a huge number of military facilities, not just energy related, but military ones as well, starting from Dubna, where the nuclear center is, which I believe is about 120 kilometers from Moscow, and ending with various facilities like Kashira, which are to the south.
Roman Yuryevich, please, as if the audience is listening to you. Defense Express, I'm reading the news. Ukraine now has its own ballistic missiles. The Ukrainian company Firepoint is preparing, or rather has developed and is preparing to deliver new generation FP7 and FP9 missiles to the armed forces of Ukraine. The FP7 is in the final stage of preparation and is expected to enter serial production by the end of 2025. The next in the lineup will be the FP9 missile, a version capable of hitting targets at ranges previously unreachable for Ukraine. The stated flight range reaches 855 kilometers. Roman Yegorovich, it's as if you were just heard. The floor is yours. No.
They didn't hear us. It's actually the Firepoint folks, those fiery show-offs who got their announcement heard. And they were simply reprinted. Most likely all these guys studied together at the same acting school and were involved in filmmaking, not in actual missile production as such. The transfer of missiles at a serial, first of all, at a serial level means mass production. At the moment, if that were the case, they would already be operating on Russian territory. The stated at least models FP7, FP9, with ranges of 200 and 850 kilometers, there is the capability to produce them. In the time they've been in charge, 7 years, they could have done it 4 times over. It takes a year and a half to launch a ballistic missile at our base, and in 7 years, they haven't made a single missile. The question is, where do their hands grow from? I won't say on air which part of the body they're growing from, but it's definitely somewhere below the back, that's for sure. Because making a missile, look, the Germans made the V2 almost 100 years ago. The V2 100 years ago cost, I think, 100,000 Reichsmarks per missile at the time, and they produced thousands of them. I think they started testing in 42. By 44, they had already begun mass production. And by 45, several thousand V2 rockets with good ranges of over 300 kilometers were carrying out combat missions to the west. Mostly they were sending them to London, in other words, to that side. And this was almost 100 years ago. And now the technologies are completely different. By now, they could have made that rocket 300 times over, already sent it off. Even here, the VU-2, there's no need to come up with anything new. The VU-2 was used, and they didn't even have satellites back then. They had an internal so-called positioning system that is based on gyroscopes, which allowed the rocket to reach its target with a circular probable error of plus or minus 1.5 to 200 meters. And the V1 was a cruise missile, and in fact, I think tens of thousands of them were produced, and they cost, I believe, around 10,000 Reichsmarks, which is basically nothing, all things considered. So Flamingo is basically the same as the V1, and FP7 is the same as the V2. Well, how can it not be made if the task was set? Well, I think at some point the question will arise, when, under which government, and who will be in charge of it. That's a different question. But as soon as they appear, the Russians will immediately talk about them. Believe me, the Russians were the first to report it.
Roman Nikolaevich, now regarding the occupied Donbas. A series of substations there were put out of order. According to the Osintenalis and local public groups, at least 6 objects were hit. Torets, arrival at the infrastructure facility. Dokuchaevsk was hit by a substation. Shakhtarsk hit by substation. Starobeshevo, attack on the substation. South, near Shakhtarsk. A hit on the substation has been confirmed, and part of the Starobeshevskaya TPP, likely serious damage. After the strikes, Besveta, Shakhtarsk, Zugres, Dokuchevsk, and Torres were left without power. This substation line is key for supplying electricity to the occupied areas of Donetsk region and for supporting Russian troops. Roman Nikolaevich, what do you have to say? Yes?
We did a good job in this direction. This is exactly the direction from the east approaching Donetsk. Basically, if you go further, it's on to Selidovo and then Pokrovsk. That's exactly how the Russians are moving equipment, ammunition, and personnel. So it's coming from there, starting practically from Sneznoye, and then there's not Torres. It's called something else now. That's its old name, then Shakhtarsk, then Zugres, then Kartsesk, Makevka, then Kanzonkovo a bit to the north, Makevka again, Donetsk, and then on to Selidovo in a loop. So this entire line needs to be cut off from power by various means. By the way, it's supplied by the Starobeshevskaya thermal power plant, then Zugres, the Zuyevskaya State District power plant. There have already been strikes on them, including Starobeshevo. The technological cycle has already been disrupted on several boilers. I think the second boiler was shut down at Zugres, plus the Chaikinskaya power plant has been taken offline. So basically our operational drones are working in that direction and they're doing a pretty good job. Why is cutting off power to Donbas also advantageous for us right now, for example? Because the Muscovites have sucked all the water out of there. They're great at sucking things dry. There's no water in Donbas right now. We're going to cut off the electricity. Why? Because mostly Ukrainians live there, mainly in villages in what used to be Cossack settlements. Back in the day, our Zaporizhian Cossacks used to travel to the Don. My relatives are from one of those settlements. They've been lying in the cemetery for 200 years, one after another. So, for example, there's the issue of pressure on the Russian Zabroti, as I call them. These are civilians who, over the past 10 years, were resettled onto our territory. They gathered them from beyond the Urals, brought them there, and the Ukrainians left the city. The Ukrainians who stayed on the occupied territory are mostly in the villages. But in the villages, there's water, there are generators, there's electricity there. If you need to use the toilet, you can just run outside. So that's not a problem. But in the cities, the Russians brought in these so-called civilian occupiers. But since there aren't such measures against civilians, this is what they call civilian occupation. If they have a Russian passport in their pockets, then they are not considered civilians in the occupied territory, and the Geneva Conventions on the protection of civilians do not apply to them. In other words, they are occupiers in the purest sense. Naturally, they need to be pushed out. One of the ways is to cut off the electricity. Like I said, those Moscow leeches already messed with the water there. But as for the electricity, our drone forces will take care of that.
Roman Igorovich, now let's talk about Ryazan and Rostov-on-Don. In Ryazan, there's an oil refinery, there's a fire, there's video footage, and in Rostov-on-Don, there was an Atesh sabotage. The Atesh movement claimed responsibility for destroying an electric locomotive that was transporting military cargo. Rostov is the main distribution hub for Russia's southern and eastern military groups. Disrupting logistics in this direction is a powerful strategic blow. What will be the impact?
So one of the railway lines from Rostov goes south through Mariupol, while another line goes north to Donetsk through Ilovaisk. That's exactly where the strikes on the power supply for this Ilovaisk group happened. By the way, Ilovaisk was put out. At the very least, the electric traction along this line was knocked out. So this is very important for us. This is exactly the Rostov direction, but the ATG finished the job. In some areas, at least, the guys are doing a great job. You could even call them partisans, concerned partisans. But they're working directly on the Russian railway, cutting it, sometimes blowing it up, sometimes just knocking it down or laying it down. Well, whatever the right word is, let the Russians figure out what's correct there. In other words, they're taking out Russian trains carrying military equipment, and of course, Ryazan as well. The Ryazan oil refinery, by the way, that's in the southeastern direction, which is important as it's one of the technological corridors. Because in Ryazan, there's also an IPS, which was also hit. It's either 500 kilowatts or 750. I don't remember exactly, but it's more than 500 kilowatts. And there's also the Ryazan oil refinery, which pumps diesel, gasoline, and aviation kerosene through pipelines to Moscow. These are technological corridors. And Diaghilevo is also there in Ryazan. That is, it's an airfield where the Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 are based. And these are the Kh-21 and Kh-22 missiles on the Tu-22M3+. Also at Diaghilevo, there's this flight crew retraining center and an aviation plant, an aircraft factory. So it's a pretty serious hub there as well, which is why I think the popular part of our drone systems won't grow over in that direction.
So, Roman Igorovich, it's possible that not only the oil refinery was attacked in the region, but also the Diaghilevo airfield. So could that also have been a strike? Yes.
It's in the same direction, the same location. They're located roughly in the same area.
Dear audience, please like this video. Let us know in the comments what you think about our strikes and Ukraine's military capabilities. Write your viewing location in the comments. How are you? We're sending you rays of kindness. Do you have power or not? Ukraine will definitely win. The well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as usual, see you this Wednesday.
Goodbye.
It's flying, damn. Another one is flying.
It's flying, it's flying. There it is. It's shooting.
It's definitely coming this way. I clearly see it approaching. Quiet now, absolutely quiet. Look, over there.
hole. And what exactly is it? Just wait a moment, please. Some kind of a particular sort of thing.
Vehicle.
Damn, that's already the 4th or 5th drone flying by. You can hear a moped over there. Fuck. Yeah, that's absolutely unequivocally right. An explosion. A flash. Shit, fuck. Unbelievable. Fucking assholes, damn.
Fucking crap. Where did it go? Where? And where over there? Oh my goodness, look at that. There's another one appearing right now, a truly distinct and rather large one. It's definitely coming into view. Oh wow, it's actually positioned directly by my beloved son, standing right over there, quite close to him. Look.
What is it? Is it a unit yet? Hell if I just know. This is fucked. So basically they drove the 33rd into the shelter on the territory because there are incoming strikes there.
Where did it go? Where? And where over there? Bro! How are you doing today, my good friend? Now there's more firewood coming. Oh, it's really intense over there. Look,